Welcome everybody in the audience to Rain or Shine again today for the second time. This time we will do it in English, and we have the great pleasure to welcome and introduce Jessie May Peters. A round of applause. Yeah, it's definitely a great pleasure to have you here. And really what we're going to talk about is something that we both talked about a lot, is really how you can progress in your coffee career, because maybe you want to progress. Maybe we can talk about this word progress also, but because it's fine if you start as a barista and you stay a barista, but maybe you also want to at least evolve or see something else. And you've done that for sure. And it's going to be a great story to hear. And I'm looking forward to this conversation and see what you're up to, because, you've been to a few places lately and you have many stories to tell. And so you can tell us all your different aspects of your career and coffee life. So welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited because career progression is something that is, like you said, it's really dependent on what you aspire to achieve. And though my progression started as a barista and I now work for a green coffee producer and exporter, the concept of progression doesn't need someone to go from making coffee to green, because often that's the way that at least some people have spoken about career progression, is that you don't stay as a barista, but in fact it can be very different. So my particular route is exactly that. I've gone from the barista to the green side, but I think what's interesting is actually how my actual role in the green company I work for is actually quite different to what I expected it would become. So there's a lot we can unpick. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. So first question first. Why coffee? How did you end up in coffee? Because we're not going to tell your age, but you're still young,
10-30.
Yeah, exactly. And how old were you when you started coffee?
So I started in coffee when I was 24. So I was, to give some backstory to how I wound up in coffee, as you said, I studied graphic design at university and had moved into different jobs that were, once I'd left my studies, were making moves towards graphic design as the concept, because I studied design, this very large topic. And I still didn't really know what I wanted to do, because everything in the creative industries is incredibly broad. So even design can be things, packaging, logo design, website design, coding, all of these things can fall under that. And it was this huge world that I didn't really know where I wanted to focus. So I started working as an intern for a branding company in East London, where I'm from London originally. And when I was there, I quite quickly realized that the culture of being in a design studio just wasn't the right fit for me. It didn't feel like I was connecting with people very well, in the sense of it was very much a competitive industry. And I'm not a very competitive person. I don't like that as a trait for a company or a culture, because it creates a lot of jealousy and envy in places where people maybe would be better and more comfortable in their skills if they didn't have that pressure. So there were things about it immediately that I didn't like. But during this time, the place where I was working was very far from where I was living. And before work, I would get off about an hour and a half on the train on the Underground in London. And I would just go for a coffee in the morning. And it would be a really nice start to a day. And I realized after a while that it became my favorite part of the day. And after a bit of thinking, I realized that actually it was about the space that I was in and the barista that I was getting to know on a quick level each morning, that was actually something that was creating something really special for me. So when the internship started to go a bit sour and I didn't really like the environment anymore, I left the position and I asked directly in the coffee shop if they had any spaces, if they were hiring. And I'd been fascinated. It was the first time I'd ever seen latte art. It was my first real experience of, this is 2014, my first experience of seeing anybody really producing the things that Proof Rock had been doing for some time, but like specialty coffee in London was not huge. It was still very much like becoming something quite big. And it was at that point that I started working for a company called Harrison Hall, which is a sister company to the no longer existing Taylor Street Baristas, for those who may have heard of them. And the most interesting thing was that they created this community around education. So they didn't really ask you about where your coffee skills were at, because for a lot of people, nobody really in the team had yet a specialty coffee background. You didn't really at that time have a portfolio of cafes or an AST course that you may have studied, sorry, AST run course that you might have studied. It was all stuff that you know, if you had it, it was quite cool, but it was not absolutely mandatory. And because of that, their education platforms were enormous. We were thrown right into an incredible education program. And so I can really say that I can thank Harrison Hall for starting that interest, because the way that they created the information around the countries of origin, around the flavor of an espresso, it was engaging and interesting. And the goal for them with the work was to say, if you're very committed to this, then we can train you to be a barista competitor. They weren't slowing that process down. It was very much, if this is something that's interesting to you, we will take you as far as we can take you with it. And so a lot of really great baristas have come out of Harrison Hall. Paul Ross, who was the UK barista champion, I think he still is. You know, he came out of Harrison Hall as well. And there's just been a lot of people who've done some fantastic things that have come out of that. So they created a culture, essentially.
Okay. How long is the first training? Is it just a few days or more than that? Back
then, it was sort of 2 full weeks of training.
Oh, wow.
It was a real course. And so you would be able to, and it was kind of like an extended interview, I guess. And it was
you were already an employee, or it was something that you had to pay from your pocket?
No, it was a trial period. So you were paid to come in, and then after the 2 weeks, you would either receive your post or you would not. And that was the way it was done. Much in the same way that when you take a SCA course, you will do the course, and then you find out at the end if even though you've done all of the work, you find out if you've actually achieved the certification. So it was a way of getting a job, I guess. You would still be paid for the time, but you'd find out if you had a job at the end of that 2 weeks.
All right.
Yeah. So that was very good.
But so you stayed on. You're like, yeah, that's my thing.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. So within that time, I think it took me 6 months before I was doing the UKBCs. UK Barista Championships, and there was a team of us. I think there was 5 of us who competed that year, and it was a real team effort because everybody was in this culture. There were people around you who were also, you would go after work to the training center and you would work on your espresso and you would do routines, and it was this constant progression that way as a group. And so when we eventually went to the finals in Scotland, there were 4 of us in the finals, and so we were able to all be there as a group. And it was an amazing experience. But that really, that was the first and the last time that I competed on a sort of a national stage. But that's purely because I'm not a very competitive person. I really enjoyed the way it worked and being a part of it. But I was certainly very keen to see if I could do, and I did do well. But it's a huge investment of time. As anybody who's competed knows, it's a huge investment of time and a huge investment of money, particularly the Barista Championships. But it's great as well that there are so many really accessible competitions now, like cupping, for example. Cup Tasters is such a good competition for accessibility. So I might do it again. We'll see.
We'll see you, I'm sure.
One day.
Okay, so the competition route was not the way you wanted to, or it was not in your blood, let's say, because some people do like a big career out of a competition win, and that's fine. But you don't have to be a winner to have a career in coffee, thankfully. So what was the next step for you?
So for me, the next thing was trying to work out how I could achieve my life goal at that point, which was to live in France. So I'd been teaching myself French for several years, you know, through school and then into adulthood. And it dawned on me after I'd done the UKBC that there was a much bigger world in coffee outside of a coffee shop, firstly, outside of a company, because of Harris and Hall as a bubble, a great bubble. And then realizing that we were going to another part of the UK, and there were people from around the UK who had their own bubbles, and it kind of felt like this rolling visual thing where I realized that what we had existed everywhere. And what that meant was if it existed here, then it could exist in France. And it was at that point that I started doing a lot of research into European coffee as a concept anyway. Obviously, the French love a café club. Like we all know that as a concept, but the idea of there being a community, I started to look into if it existed, and it did. So once I realized that I could move, and the Eurostar was so great, and we didn't have Brexit, so I could just move without a visa, it was within maybe 2 months of realizing that I was making moves to do it. And yeah, I think the first experience that I had was Meuf Press. That was at Café Lustique back in the day, and I came over to do that competition, and that was my first experience of Parisian coffee, and it was just a really, really quickly moving thing. So within 2 months, I moved by September 2015. So I'd only been in coffee a year by this point, and I just went for it. But it was a really great experience, and it came hand in hand with the Barista Guild, which, as you know, I'm now the chair of the Barista Guild, but that first started at the exact same time as me wanting to move to Paris. So I volunteered, and volunteering is the thing I will say as part of this is the most important thing I've ever done in coffee. This was my first experience of volunteering. And so you were able to go to a Barista Guild event, and you still are, as a volunteer for free, if you're willing to give your time to help. That would be setting up cuppings, making sure everybody goes to the right, you know, it's an all kind of encompassing thing when you volunteer at an event in coffee. But it meant immediately that I was able to create a network very quickly. And that was the thing that was most important for me. So I moved to Paris. I started working at a coffee shop called Honor. And the same week that I moved to Paris. And then 3 days later, I flew to Italy. And then I was doing the volunteering for the Barista Guild. So it happened at the exact same time. A bit of a baptême de feu. It was like really like straight in, just everything all at once. And I loved that energy of just being around people that were just trying to do things and wanting to learn and just wanting to talk to each other. And the moment I had that feeling, I just didn't want to get rid of that. So I just came back, and then the Barista Guild Paris collab happened, you know, a couple of months later. And so it all was just very, very quick to kind of roll into being very much about being in coffee and being in France.
It was very timely, but in the same time, I have to say, I mean, you were adventurous, right? Not many people or barista mates in the UK would have made that move. You know, right. It was you went to see something else and to explore something else. So yes. Right from the start, even a year after you started in coffee. Yeah,
I think I don't ever have a problem saying that I don't know the answer to a question either. So I went in with there was no naivety about what I was doing. I was incredibly curious, and I went to every single class because of being a volunteer. I would help set it up, and then I would stay and I would watch a class. So I was just there to be around people. I'd never done a full SCA qualified cupping before. So I watched, we had some Guatemalan producers with us in Italy, and they did a cupping, and I was like, well, here we go. We're just going to learn now. And so every step, but it's just always been like that. And yeah. I think people like when you don't, if people are honest about not knowing the answer to something and being willing to learn something together, I think it creates a better atmosphere than someone saying that they believe that they know everything. I've never been interested in that mentality. And so what I found so interesting with Barista Guild is that it was from the beginning, everybody was there to just say, I don't know, I'm here. to learn.
And you have to come and say, okay, hello, I want to learn also. And I think it happened like a few times in your career. Like, you know, at the very first time you asked that barista, hey, how can I get a position here? And then we'll talk about it later, but how you got into green coffee, it's more or less the same. And so like, and every time you learn something with the Barista Guild, at the very beginning, it was the same. So you have to, you know, get out of your comfort zone, or at least just say that, you know, you want to learn. That's absolutely no problem at all. And everybody, we're lucky enough to be in a community in the coffee industry, where, at least in specialty coffee, where, you know, a lot of people want to share their knowledge and want to welcome you in their world. So the Barista Guild for you, it's really such a world.
Oh, it's been fantastic. And I use the term Barista Guild. I use the words of like Barista Guild in my experiences alongside the SCA, because the same sort of experiences in volunteering that I had through volunteering at Roasters Camp. I work with the Barista Guild, but alongside that in the SCA, you have the Roasters Camp. So if you can also have an interest in roasting, I have no idea about roasting. I've never been a roaster. Going to that, I was able to learn very, very sort of basic intermediate, beginner to intermediate stuff by just volunteering and standing at the back and just listening and being around it. So yeah, I feel like that has been a really worthwhile thing.
Is it complicated to get volunteers today?
I mean, no, I think it really depends. I find that some like chapters of the SCA have a harder time. It really depends on how big your coffee community is and how much work is expected of them. For example, the examples I can give, I guess, with the SCA France and SCA UK, it really depends on the kind of events you're holding. And with Barista Guild events, it's been pretty good. Like there have always been, we've never been without, but sometimes you get more volunteers and some you get less. One of the issues that we've been trying to work on recently with the Barista Guild events is accessibility, because not everybody as a barista can get the time off to go to an event to volunteer. Like it's a holiday commitment. It's not always possible for somebody to say with either I choose to use my free time for this, or I have this free time to do this. Also, you know, to volunteer at an event, you have to pay for your own travel and accommodation. So exactly. Something that you can do, which is why I think being on online events like this is so interesting. We did an online virtual party for the Barista Guild 2 weeks ago. We spoke about it a little bit, and it was very much a volunteer effort. That could not have happened if people had not been able to volunteer. Yet the volunteers we had were across the world, and it was organizing platforms such as this one. It was making sure that we had sponsorship videos that could come up, and it was very much hands-on, but it meant everybody could be there because there was no travel to pay for. There's no hotel to worry about. And so for me, as the chair this year, I'm hoping that we can make barista digital events something that we do a lot more of. Mm-hmm. It might be something down to childcare that people can't come. It might be a disability that people can't come. If for whatever reason it is, online gives us so much more opportunity to reach a lot more people for a lot less money as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to what you're going to do with the Barista Guild. Then, but maybe because we talked already quite a bit about the Barista Guild, can you tell us what your position is and really what it entitles? Like, what do you do with the Barista Guild? Like, does it take you a lot of time?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So the Barista Guild as the chair, which I am now, essentially, I'm not a piece of furniture. The word is quite strange. Like in that, I guess it's like the manager of the group. So we have a chair and a vice chair who are looking after and leading a group of around 9 to 10 people. So we have the leadership committee, or in short, the BGLC. And the BGLC is a volunteer group of people from right across the world. And that group will create events, concepts and projects throughout the year, which are directly focused on helping the barista community internationally and on a local level. So COVID has been a really interesting challenge for us because we usually would have, as you know, the Barista Guild, the Barista Camps, collab, we have expo parties in the US, we have Bloom, all these different things that happen. We had our Barista Camp in Taiwan 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And so there's always these in-person events. And so we've had to look at very different options this year. So for me personally, my role includes managing the monthly meetings. So creating a culture within my leadership so that people can feel confident in their own ideas. If you're ever looking to become a volunteer for the Barista Guild, one thing which is always really important to express is that if you have an idea or something that you want to create that would benefit the barista community at large, there is space for it. The SCA supports the Barista Guild. There is a group of people who are always willing and interested to work on projects. And we are a small expression of the entire coffee community. And if there is something that you need help with, subtitling for something, there is always a project that can be worked on and people that are willing to do it. And so I'm very lucky this year. My leadership committee are full of ideas. We've had so many. The virtual Barista Guild party was an idea of 3 of the leadership council. And before the event was happening, I didn't know how it was going to run, which I realized was a really good sign because it meant that it was existing without the chair needing to run it. The people on the committee are volunteers who are very passionate and actively working. And so if people in the barista community have that feeling as well, then the Barista Guild is a really interesting and exciting way to use that energy.
Very nice. Yeah. It's well, I'm happy to see that there's a lot of energy. Yeah, but because that's what you need in an association, and especially when you have volunteers, when it's run by volunteers, you do need a lot of energy for it to provide to the community. Yeah. And so that's great. It's very good, and I believe you do a good job at it. Are you going to be there next year as well?
So the way it works, once you've been the chair for 1 year, you then become the past chair. So I then become more of a consultant to the Barista Guild in a way.
Cool.
So I would be able, if people needed extra help or guidance and thoughts, I'm always available and present on the phone calls, in-person meetings. But the chair who follows me will then delegate in the same way that I have this year, create projects with the team. And then the past chair is there as advice, also to help with elections each year. So it's more of a supporting role. Okay.
So far, how was the effect on you? Maybe just like personally, but also on your coffee career, because it's a quite a big commitment of time, and also but you get to meet a lot of people and do a lot of things. What is your conclusion so far?
It's a good question because it has been such a use of time. It's never been a strain, but you do realize that if you're going to do this kind of level of volunteering, it's not an event to event thing where you in June know you're going to volunteer at an event. You're volunteering at least 2 hours a week of time, and that's something that we have contractually in the agreement of the Leadership Council. So you have to commit at least 2 hours a week. That goes up for the chair because we are coordinating different events. And the interesting thing is if you want to progress through the levels of management and responsibility, you have to have been serving for an amount of time. So I've been with the Barista Guild for 5 years now, but elected on the Guild Council for 3. And by the end of my tenure, that will be next year, be 2021. So I would have been actively involved in the Barista Guild for 6 years by the time I'm officially done. That's not everybody has to do that. I always wanted to position myself where I could become the chair. I was always interested in leading that and seeing what could happen if I were to be able to be that kind of person who's managing. And so I had that goal in mind, and I was fortunate enough to become the chair. And so that was my goal. I was actually saying the other day, it's going to be so weird when I'm not in the Barista Guild anymore, because it's been something that's been part of my entire coffee career. It's going to be very, very strange.
Yeah.
So
are you going to miss it?
It's opened up so many doors for me. Mostly travel-wise, I think is pretty fair to say. As I work for a green coffee company, I do travel quite a lot, but alongside the Barista Guild has been a lot of travel. So it's opened up a lot of doors for me. The best one was going to run our first camp in Asia, in Taiwan. That was an amazing experience to see an entirely different culture, and then how baristas are the same all over the world. And just seeing their passion and interest in wanting to learn, it was great. So, yeah.
Because the Barista Guild is global, right? It's not Europe only.
So it used to be the BGE and the BGA, respectively. So the European and American sides. We've now opened up internationally. So we have a very large membership in South Korea, very large. And so it was one of those things when we unified in 2016 and to 17, it was a goal of saying, okay, well, what are we going to do in this time to make sure that it's available worldwide? So we opened up elections worldwide, and we're hoping to be able to be more present around the world year on year. It's just creating that network, I think, with the chapters, because the SCA as a network is very, very interesting in that each country has its own chapter, but chapters are not always as more active as a volunteering group. So it's working out who really represents their community and how can we support them across the entire world. So it's quite a lot of work.
It is quite a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work. So although you're the boss of all the baristas in the world, you're not just joking. You're not on the payroll for this. You're volunteering, so that's not how you get a living. So what is your job? If not that.
Yes, so my volunteering side is fully exhausted by the Barista Guild, but in my day-to-day job, I am the sales and marketing manager for Raw Material. So for those who don't know, Raw Material is a green coffee producer, exporter, and importer. And we work in a few countries around the world. They are Colombia, Rwanda, Burundi, Timor-Leste, and most recently Mexico. So yes. Question.
Can we go a little bit, make a rewind, because we're going to get there, but we have to see the progression in your career. Okay. Because so you mentioned you arrived in Paris, and all right, it was very timely because everything was starting. Your new life in France, your new life as a barista in a street level coffee shop, the Barista Guild, and you mentioned that the first coffee shop you work with was Honor. Can you tell us about it?
Of course, yeah. So Honor is a fantastic specialty coffee shop in the 8e arrondissement, so the 8th district of Paris. They also have a new shop now in, is it the 3e or the 10e? No, c'est
10e. 10th, I say.
La Bastille. They have neighbors as well. So they have two coffee shops. One is more of a brunch spot and one is directly focused on coffee. And it was great to be there because Daniel and Angel, who run it, are incredibly quality focused as a team. So for me, as I didn't even mention the fact that I was a coffee trainer before moving to, I went from Harrison Hall to be a coffee trainer in the UK for a company called Gather and Gather. So I went from training people to then going into a space whose whole métier was directly very, very high focused quality coffee. And so I learned a lot with them. And I went from being a trainer to being a barista again. And it was a fantastic process because each coffee shop, as many of you will know, will have its own style of doing things. Even though we have different brewing methods and ideas around coffee, each coffee shop will have its own culture within that. So it gets more and more micro in that respect. So it was a really good space to learn in. And
I'm interested because you're the chair of the Barista Guild, and you did work in one of the coffee shops that takes the quality to the highest standard. So could you give us, because there actually has been some debate in France still about the word barista and the definition of the craft. So could you try to give us your definition of a barista?
Oh, definitely barista. I mean, you haven't said specialty barista either, so I don't even have to go that deep, but I could. So I would probably say that a barista is a hospitality professional whose main directive focus is the quality of coffee in a coffee shop or a restaurant. That would be my definition. So like, it's because hospitality professional is to say that you don't just make coffee. Right. A lot of people in these roles can hope that they're going to hide behind a machine, but you are the dishwasher. You are maybe the person who writes the rotor. You might do the deliveries. You might do the ordering. You might make the cakes.
Service, quality.
Of course, yes. Front of house, actively. There is no differentiation between any of those roles.
I do like that definition, and because in France, sometimes we most of the content we get in France is made abroad, right, in English, and some of it, of course, comes from Australia because it's just a landmark, and what we read, what we get from them is from a standpoint of a coffee shop where there is a huge amount of drinks made every day. So some of these baristas actually could spend their day behind the machines and they don't have to do anything unless there is some sort of change of post. Yeah. But in France, you can't do that, or it's very rare that you're in a coffee shop where you spend the whole day behind the machine. You have to be able to do a lot of different things, and so sometimes I think people are looking for a definition that takes that also in account in France. And I think your definition is really good. I don't know if if people had the time to write it down, but we'll definitely go back to the podcast and the video, and I take that away from it, and I'll print it right in big letters.
I think it's important because I've certainly been in barista positions where people have, maybe in the way a manager has described the roles of a coffee shop, they have created a differentiation between barista and front of house, and that, without realizing it, can create a lot of conflict between a team, because there will always be people in front of house who will of course want to learn, because front of house and barista, you can become a fantastic front of house person, but when you've got a piece of machinery and equipment and all these things, that will always look like something that is a skill to learn, that is maybe more tangible than the skills you learn when you're in the front of house. So people want to be involved in it. If you create two sections of your team where somebody is serving the drinks and one of them is making them, you create a tension, which I don't necessarily think is productive. And I've been in plenty of scenarios like that. So you need to cross-train all staff, I think, to do both, because then there's no feeling of difference, because that's the worst thing that you want in particularly a small team, maybe 5+ members of staff. You don't need that separation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you, to go back to Honor, actually, it's mainly you were like one or two in the because you have to say it's a kiosk rather than a coffee shop, at least the first one.
Exactly, it's a kiosk in a courtyard. It's outdoors, it's exposed. You were seen on each side. You'd have it's kind of, for those who haven't seen it, it's kind of a box when it's closed, and then each side opens up on two faces, but people will sit behind you because you can get access behind the bar to sit down. You have people in front of you, and you have a courtyard with seating to the side. So it's almost like being on a stage in that particular kiosk shop. And you'd have one person running the morning, and then another person joining for lunch, and you'd both close. So you would be one or two maximum people at any time. And that, obviously, you cannot have one person on a machine and only being the machine person, because there's so much to do. There is soup to heat, there are fridges to clean, there are tables to clean, there are babies to amuse, you've got everything to do. So yeah, absolutely everybody doing everything. But I've also been in scenarios where that is not the case, where you have someone who's employed as front of house, and to manage somebody who's front of house from your management is actually quite hard when you know that they really want to be involved. And so it's maybe in those scenarios hosting cuppings after work for everybody, so everyone feels like they're a part of something, and things like that can maybe level the playing field a little bit.
I just gonna answer something on the chat. You advanced as a barista very fast and very quickly with Honor, and although you did learn a lot and you mastered a few good tricks, why didn't you stay there, and why were you looking for something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I knew that being in coffee in France would be a really great place for me to stay and continue learning French. But I realized right in the very beginning when I was in that first Barista Guild event that I wanted to understand just how big coffee was, because before coffee, I didn't drink it. I can even say I didn't like it. I would never really consider, and before I had that internship position where I would make it part of my daily role, and I would just really, really get to understand flavor over that amount of time. And so, yeah, I think for me, when I realized through the training of Harrison Hall and then going to France, like everything just got bigger and bigger and bigger until, which is the part you wanted to talk about before, until when we were at Beans on Fire, which is a coffee shop and roastery in Paris. I saw my first full presentation about green coffee. And that was with my now boss, Matt Grayley, and he was doing a European tour, and Maria from Beans on Fire had given him the space for the evening to host a cupping of coffees from Myanmar, where he was doing consultancy work. The country used to be known as Burma, for those who don't know it. And they have a very difficult socioeconomic scenario, but also produce coffee. So it was the first time that I had ever really been shown the entirely different part of coffee. It was a coffee cupping, and I'd been to plenty of those by this point, but it was talking about it as a pre-roast, as a plant, as a huge export for a country. Suddenly this thing that I'd been enjoying as a beverage and exploring flavor, it suddenly became less and less important to me, that area of coffee, because though I can really appreciate the quality and taste in a cup, realizing that there were lives at stake in Myanmar and the importance of coffee as a livelihood for millions of people around the world suddenly put the quality level of the flavor profile in a much smaller part of my interest. Suddenly this whole other world opened up, and I was like, I know truly nothing about this, nothing at all. So I watched the discussion, and we had the cupping, and it was great. And I said to Matt at the time, I said, how do I learn more about green coffee? Where do I start? I need to learn more. And he said, just keep doing what you're doing, learning and stuff like this. And I asked him, like, where is your next stop in the tour? And he said, well, we're going to World of Coffee in Dublin. And I said, that's great, because I'm already volunteering at World of Coffee Dublin. I was already going, and I was cleaning the coffee machines for the World Barista stage. There was a team of us who'd go, and that was an experience in itself. You fund these things yourself as well. So I'd taken time off work, and I was flying to Dublin, and it turns out they were going to be there at the same time. And I said, well, I'll be there. So I kind of followed them, even though it wasn't planned that way. But I met them again in Dublin. And at that event, I then realized, after some thinking, that green coffee could be something that I should move towards because of where I was interested now. And so at the Dublin World of Coffee, I said to Matt, once this is all finished, because events like World of Coffee, for anyone who's been, are very intense. It's very hard to have a real interesting and deep conversation. And I said, after this, can we have a Skype or something? I'd like to know more about what you do. And he said, that's fine. So we did that. I went back to Paris, back to work. And 2 weeks later, we had the phone call. And during that phone call, he asked me if he could turn it into an interview. And it was the most shocking thing ever, because I had realized very quickly that this was exactly where I wanted to be going. And so I was interviewed for the role. And it would involve moving away. It was a lot of different things that I had to consider. And after 2 weeks of waiting to find out if I'd got the role, I received a phone call that I was unsuccessful. I didn't get the role. And it was because I didn't speak Spanish. And I was just a little bit too new into the world, I think, for the green coffee world. So I said, look, this isn't the last time you're going to hear from me, essentially. I said, what can I do? What can I do to make sure that I am and this is an important thing, and I've realized this since this time, is that when you don't get the role and you think it's important for you, you actively should ask the person who's just said no, what can I do so that next time this role comes around, I'm a viable candidate? And he said, well, it's quite simple. 3 things. Cup coffee as much as you can, learn Spanish, and join us in Colombia for a trip. And
okay.
I was like, well, all right, 2 of those things seem feasible, but I've got a barista wage, so this is going to take some saving. So I cupped as much as I could. I bought 2 phrase books in Spanish, and I was, trying to do as much as I could. And then I was told that their next trip was going to be that November coming, which is the main harvest in Colombia. And he said, if you want, you can come on this trip. So I saved up all my barista money. I stopped eating my cheese and drinking my wine. I truly, truly saved up as much as I could. And that November, I went to Colombia with them. Conveniently, and because it was with a European flight company, I received my money back for my flight. So it ended up being like not a huge pain for my barista budget.
Nice.
But yeah, that was amazing. And I think if you're committed to a role as much as I was then, for them as an employer to see that I was committed enough to do all of the things that was said, I just appeared in Colombia. I was like, well, I've done it now. I was showing that I was very committed to it, and I was not shopping around. I was not looking at other green importers. I had this one as my goal. And it was this time that when we were in Colombia, he said, well, okay, if this is something you're still committed towards, then we should start building a role for you, because they were looking to grow into UK and Europe. And so it took well over a year and a half for me to get the role that I have now, and a lot of determination, but it happened, and I've been working for raw material since 2017, so we're coming up on 3 years.
Already, yeah.
Crazy.
And you've been to many producing countries, and so we understood what your function was at the Barista Guild, but can you explain exactly what you do with raw material?
Yeah, so my role is European sales and head of communications. And so what's interesting now with my role, and what I was talking about at the very beginning of our conversation, was that I never expected that my job would then become what I studied. So I've gone from being absolutely uninterested in the design world to going fully through barista and being in hospitality, and then moving into green coffee, which on the face of it is import, logistics, export, and working in a country. But my particular role, because of where my skills are, has been able to be focused directly on design, marketing, newsletters. I'm building the website at the moment. We're having a big rebrand. And it's been able to be that because I had certain areas that I was skilled at, I could then apply them to the job that I have. But we are still a very small team, which has probably been a favorable thing for my career, because we're only 6 or 7 people now across the world. And, design is something that is very expensive if you get people outside of business to do it and hire people in. So to have me on board to be able to help with those things and build these things from within has been very important. So that's how my role is now.
Yes. I think it's in the coffee world. We as you said, we come from very different backgrounds, and it's the richness of it that I really like also. Though of course, I think in the future, starting from now, we should definitely help education in general to put things in place where people can actually learn and be trained as different, not just baristas, but also the different aspects of coffee in like as young as possible in a way. And you did mention before in our conversation that there are universities like the one in Zurich, the ETH, and the department run by Shahan Yeredzan does a lot of high-end research for it. And of course, all the graduate students and the postdocs and the such who work with him are really high level. And there are also UC Davis and some other universities. But yeah, the education also that we need for the future generation, I suppose, also need to be there for the youngest. Having said that, it was just like going far away from what we were seeing, but also we as a coffee community and small, very often in specialty coffee, there are small businesses. We do benefit a lot from the backgrounds of all the different members of staff. And that you're a very good example also for raw material. And the design and the marketing is so important for any kind of business, but in specialty coffee, I'd say it's huge.
Huge, yeah, it's enormous. And not every small business will have a budget for that kind of thing. So I think what's great about how so many of us have not chosen to be in coffee from the very beginning is that there are a lot of creative people within the coffee communities who are artists or musicians or video editors who use coffee as a way to maybe bring in some income and then maybe see it as more of a serious career. And then suddenly they have these options. So there are actually so many people within coffee who have a creative background, and it creates a lot of value. I've never agreed with the phrase "never judge a book by its cover," because it's so much of what we will choose whether we drink something from or read across all different manners of life. And so, designing a good logo for a company or the right name or the style, like all of these things that if you were asked, do they affect your choices? You may say no, but on a very important subconscious level, they will be having an effect on you, whether you feel affected by them or not. So design is an enormous player. And you can see when people do it well, and you can see when it plays into how their sales work and how their customers, their numbers of their customers and all of these things. So design is a hugely important part of the consumer world.
Yeah. You mentioned the Coffee Roasters Guild, and we were both there. And I always remember Taylor's talk, and she mentioned like how the design of coffee bags increased her sales like enormously. So I mean, her design is pretty special for sure, but yeah, it's definitely not something to put aside if you can afford, if you don't have the ability within your team. But if you do have it, it's priority. Just to know, like, are you available for if people have projects for you?
Yeah, thank you for the plug. Yes, like I absolutely am. Yeah, I have. I'm always working on small illustrations for different projects. I'm working on a food blogs weekly newsletter illustration at the moment. But yeah, I'm always available. Please, if you can add my email address to this, Manuel, that would be great.
Yes, it's already on your profile. So if people want we provide jobs for everybody. No, but I mean, the competence, the skills are there. So if you guys are available and if Jessie May is available for that work, I've worked with her and I know how awesome she does for that kind of project. So, and I've seen also you mentioned the party, the barista party, and I think the poster also the illustration was from you.
Yes, it was.
The Barista Guild party. Yeah.
It was. And I think back very fondly to the posters we made for La Journée Scientifique du Café. That was great. That was a lot of fun to make.
Yeah.
It
was a beautiful project. We may, for people who haven't heard of it, we organized it with a small group of people a coffee science day in Paris. That was maybe 2015. And we never know if rain or shine works. We might do like an online version of it for like the second edition. We see. Okay, so if we can maybe like summarize the different steps and also, you know, what you need to have within you to make your coffee career advance as you did, what would you say were the key points there?
I feel the most, if I look back at my experiences, I think I can say the most important thing is having a willingness to use your free time to commit to contributing to other people's projects. Be that an SCA event, be that a small local cupping. I think being present and showing that you are available is going to be the thing that will really help you to maybe stand apart, because once you're seen at enough events and being actively involved, you don't know who you're necessarily going to interact with there, who may be looking for somebody for a project. It may be that something in an event you're working on can be something that you do more and more of as a volunteer that can become something that you do maybe a little bit more like full time. So there are always opportunities, but to get to the point where it becomes something that's beneficial for you as an individual and has your name attached to it, for example, you have to be present and willing to give a lot of free time. And that if there is an event that you feel is important for you to attend as a volunteer,
Jessie May, can you just repeat the last sentence, because we had a connection twitch.
Yeah, just being willing to commit some of your free time on quite a large amount of time. You know, as a barista, you don't get a lot of holiday. So, you know, really choosing to use what would be time off to commit back into the work of the coffee community. But I think that's the most important thing. For example, I mean, just saying yes to things that are intriguing for you. It might be that you try something that is maybe like volunteering to help with a cupping, and you might never want to do a cupping again. It might be the worst thing you've ever done, but you give it a go. I guess the best example of that is when we did the World of Coffee Amsterdam, and they were looking for speakers to be the MCs for the World Barista Championships. And it was part of an email that went out, and I just said, I will go for it. And it was just saying yes to doing that, which meant it was actually the World Brewers, and then it became World Barista the year later. So being willing to challenge yourself. I was not a public speaker at this point. I'd never stood in front of a crowd. I'd certainly never been on television with a microphone in my hand before. It was very nerve-wracking, and I was very scared. It was terrifying. But it was a challenge. I saw an opportunity. I'm not a TV presenter now. It hasn't become, I'm not every year's MC for this kind of thing, but it was an experience. And I would gladly do it again. But it's not become my new role. It's just saying that you can try things out and challenge yourself with new experiences.
You did it well, and especially like you came out like very like you had like outfits because you wanted to outfit Steve.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually bought that suit in Rwanda like a month before. There was an amazing fabric market, and I thought, like, if there's any place I'm going to get a suit, it's going to be here. And I got this beautiful yellow and blue suit made in traditional Rwandan fabrics, and it was I think he was annoyed as well because he just had a blazer and jeans that year. He was so used to wearing bright red, and then I just turned up wearing like his level of suit. So it was quite fun.
Very fun. Okay. So that's good. And also, like I'd say, you came out forward, and talking to the people you thought were of interest, just in general, but also to you and to your career. And I think it's just it's a big lesson. Also, I think it's just like it's not easy for a lot of people to how do you maybe have an advice for this for the most shy of us?
Yeah, I think realizing that the people that you admire are people, and all of the nerves and worries that you have as an individual, they will also have on some level. I also think if you aspire to speak to someone who is a hero of yours, and they are famous, let's say a Matt Perger, for example, if someone really aspires to meet Matt Perger, the thing that I would really try, if you're wanting to have a deep conversation with somebody on that kind of level, I think they're used to being fanboyed enough that it won't help your deep discussion with somebody if you go in praising their work too much. This has never happened to me. It's just something I think, because, you know, I feel if somebody is that big in the game and you're looking to have a very deep conversation that could lead to maybe employment opportunities or networking, go in as a conversation rather than that they're on a pedestal. You know, it's this idea of realizing that people who get a lot of attention may just want to have a conversation with somebody. And so I think it would be a positive thing, and to not feel nervous about approaching somebody, but maybe it would make you feel better and them less separate from you if you don't go in going, I love this thing you did, thank you so much. You know, be like, hey, like, how have you found the festival? What's the most interesting thing you've seen today? Going in with what questions is better than going in with statements about how inspired you were, because let's be honest, they probably get it a lot. You know, make it seem that you're a valuable person to talk to, because you are, but it has to be something that's not just about them. A conversation, you know?
Yes, and not necessarily go and say like, you were wrong about this.
Sure. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because if it's going to be a good conversation, you'll get there. You know, you will get to that point. Also, if they haven't got enough time, you know, when I gave my my email address to Matt at the World of Coffee in Dublin, I didn't know if there'd ever be a conversation, but it was saying this place that we're in now is too busy for the conversation that I want, which is essentially what I was saying. I was saying through my request to have a Skype 2 weeks later that I want to be able to have a very personal conversation with you and asking about your experiences. This isn't the space to do it. Here is my email address. And then saying, let's speak in 2 weeks' time. And I put it in my calendar and I sent an email as a reminder, and it happened. That won't happen with everybody, I'm sure, but just making it that you're not just fanboying somebody, because I was impressed with his work, but I wanted it to be more than that. So if you're looking for value, you know, create value in the conversations you have.
Yeah. Okay. And also, I would say like a third one would be to, you know, not be afraid of the adventure. I mean, coffee is an adventure in itself. You also, again, like, it's okay if you want to stay in your coffee shop and the whole world of coffee is there, and that's fine. But yeah, life is an adventure. Coffee is an adventure too. Like, you have that in your blood, I suppose, because like first you wanted to live in France, like how crazy you are. Mm-hmm. And so, but that was not enough for you. You wanted something else again. So like, what advice do you have for, I don't know if there's an advice, but like if someone really like starts in coffee and say like, wow, I wish I will be able to travel everywhere. Like, what's the best way? Like, again, you said the barista wage is still very low in general. Yes. And we can't all travel to the places we want. Mm-hmm. But what are the tricks?
Okay, so a trick to travel, get involved with the Barista Guild. Honestly, I mean, if travel is the goal with that, if you are, but it has a caveat. You have to commit time. So it's not like join the Barista Guild, you'll travel some, it'll be nice. It's like commit serious amounts of time, and you will be rewarded with the opportunity to travel eventually. It's one of those things. It's going to be a lot smaller than that. You know, you have to be able to save money from a barista wage to get to volunteer. Like, it's a whole chain of things.
Yeah.
It was
sacrifice. You have to sacrifice a bit.
Yeah, completely. It was a choice on my part to save €300 so I could go to World of Coffee Dublin and have that as my pool of money, and that was an amount that I committed. So, and I was on SMIC. It was nothing out, which is minimum wage. It was not out of a separate pool of money, right? So it's a choice. It's actually saying, how can I do that? But that's also to say with the internet, you know, we really can travel across the world on our phones. So being involved in webinars, putting your face out there, if you're that interested in travel and you really want that to be part of what you do, then, you know, have discourses with baristas around the world. People have been known to do barista swaps. They're not that common, but I have heard of people who have been really wanting to travel and will have lodging. You'll pay for travel, but you'll be paid a wage, and you swap with another person around the world and you do it that way. So there are a lot of different ways that you can meet people. And through those people, you may have opportunities. It might be internships. We host internships with Raw Material, and we've had several baristas from around the world spend up to like 3 months at our farm in Colombia. And that's, again, if you have the time, which is a value point. So it depends on what kind of currency you have and what you can trade for that. So time is one, and time is the biggest one, I think. And the amount of time that I personally have given, I've been able to receive back a lot of opportunities to travel. But it's been a lot of time given. So it just depends on how much you're willing to give, I guess.
Exactly. Commitment, the big word.
Big time.
Big time, for sure. Yes. And then you get a reward, because it's not just about being committed. Yeah, it's nice and rewarding when you know you've been doing all of this for something, and it's only the beginning again.
Well, there was a thing I was reading recently about how the concept of giving is the only currency that you have as a human being that will constantly replenish itself, because when you give, there will be at some point a return of that, because to show yourself as open and willing, there is a risk to it. But if you do it enough and are able to be seen as a giving person, at some point there will be a return. Yes. And you can never exhaust the amount of that fuel, as long as it's something that you can do feasibly for yourself. So
cool, very cool. Super inspiring. What's the next step for you, because your career is not finished?
Oh, I don't know. I'm doing a lot more design work these days with Raw Material. So what's interesting is seeing that the areas of focus for me for the business are a lot more focused on design work. So that may be that I focus, who knows, eventually entirely on design in coffee. I'm not sure. I still really enjoy it. I'm going to miss having an attachment to the barista side with the Barista Guild. So I'm going to have to take some part-time roles somewhere in a coffee shop, because I love it so much. And being around a space full of people and talking as well. You know, being on a computer like this is great, but I also really like to be in front of people and talking. So my next step won't be seen as this huge jump into something else. I love the work that the company I work for is doing, but it will be something much smaller, I think, for me. Like I'd love to take a part-time barista job somewhere alongside my work. Just be like a Saturday shift or something. I'll get me to clean the dishes. I'll do it.
That's perfect, because actually there was a question from the chat that I didn't ask, and it's a good way to end, I think, because you did progress a lot in your career, but you do miss the barista job, the craft as well, and the coffee shop environment, the customers, and I totally get it. But Nasco was asking, isn't it frustrating that as a barista, you can't focus on coffee preparation only, and you have to do all the other things? Is it okay to not be just a purist like coffee?
I mean, if you're in a coffee shop and by the sounds of it, it means there aren't that many of you in the shop. And yeah, it is frustrating, and it's a time management thing that will forever be difficult. But yeah, if you're working in a small cafe and you have a small amount of staff, it's all hands on deck. It's one of those things that it is frustrating, but if it's frustrating enough to you that maybe the opening shift of your shop, you're still like brewing the espresso when people are walking to the door, then get there 10 minutes before your shift starts. Like if it's important enough to you to not have that, then that's one way of looking at it. And I've done that before, where I know on a Saturday people will come in very early, because we used to be right next to quite a busy shopping street in Paris, and so you'd be like, you've got to get there a little bit earlier to start, because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fit getting everything ready into the Saturday shift for half an hour before I opened. So I'd get there a bit earlier. So that's one way. But also asking for help. If it's really at a point where you're like, I've tried all of these things, tell your managers that maybe because there are some things in prep parts of an open shift where getting the lemons and limes ready for the water stations and stuff like that. If there are certain things that you physically can't do or it's inconvenient, then ask your team I think it's really easy for us to get really angry and be like, I'm the only one experiencing this amount of work, when in fact there are other things that maybe we can't see that we could share between the team. So communicating, I think, is a really good one as well. There's always going to be something that can help, but unfortunately at some point it may be use of your own time, and I've experienced that. So, but speak first.
Very cool. All right. I don't see any other question, and I think we. It was a good hour of conversation, and I got a lot from it. And I hope you enjoyed it too, Jessie May.
I loved it. I had such a good time, and I'll be definitely tuning in for the other talks and the Directive collaborative coming up.
That was the first day, but yeah. There's two more. There is going to be Maria, Laura, who's going to talk a lot about the sort of a similar theme, coffee career progression, and what I wanted to say also, because like Rain or Shine is really also, I think, a place where you can meet people from all over the world. And Jessie May was mentioning Barista Swaps, but you can definitely find people here on Rain or Shine. Like I did find someone for a CA course that I really wanted to do, and that is still not very easy to find on sustainability. So thanks to Rain or Shine, I myself found a good educator for it, and I was able to start the class directly. And I think it can help a lot of people too. So we'll see how it goes, and we see connection. And and congratulations for all the work you do with the Barista Guild and everything. I know also that it's a lot of work.
My pleasure. Yeah, I mean, it'll be great if anybody's looking for links to certain things I've discussed, I can send you some websites and things.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll be posted as well with the podcast and everything, and the YouTube on the text alongside the video or the podcasts. So thank you also Regine, Ella, Emmanuel, and so on in the chat. And bye bye. We talk soon.
Yeah, speak to you soon.
Ciao.